The rain drummed steadily against the windows of Murphy's Diner, a weathered establishment that had served the small town of Cedar Falls for over 40 years. The neon sign outside flickered intermittently, casting an amber glow across the wet pavement where a few lonely cars sat parked beneath the streetlights. It was one of those autumn evenings when the world seemed to pause, wrapped in the melancholy comfort of October's embrace. Inside the diner, the familiar symphony of clinking silverware and muffled conversations filled the air. The black and white checkered floor bore the scars of countless footsteps, and the red vinyl booths had faded to a soft burgundy over the decades. Behind the counter, coffee percolated in a glass pot that had seen better days, its rich aroma mixing with the scent of apple pie cooling on the windowsill. At booth number 7, near the back corner where shadows gathered like old friends, sat a man whose weathered face told stories of highways traveled and songs unsung. Bob Dylan pulled his worn denim jacket closer around his shoulders, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the Formica tabletop. His signature harmonica rested beside a half-empty cup of black coffee, and his eyes held that distant look of someone who had witnessed both the beauty and brutality of the American dream. He had been driving for hours, fleeing the suffocating embrace of another recording session, another interview, another moment when the world demanded pieces of his soul. Sometimes a man needed to disappear into the anonymous comfort of small-town America, where nobody asked questions and the pie was always homemade. The bell above the door chimed softly as the evening wind pushed against the glass, and Bob watched the waitress moving between tables with the practiced grace of someone who had been dancing this routine for years. Margaret Sullivan was 62 years old, though the harsh fluorescent lights made her appear older. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her uniform, a pale blue dress with Maggie embroidered on the pocket, had been washed so many times that the fabric had grown soft as cotton clouds. She moved with quiet dignity despite the way some customers treated her. Bob had been watching for the past hour as various patrons dismissed her with waves of their hands, spoke to her without making eye contact, and left tips that barely covered the cost of their coffee. Yet Maggie continued to smile, her voice gentle and patient, as she asked about refills and dessert orders. "More coffee, hun?" she asked softly, appearing beside Bob's table with the glass pot in her weathered hands. "Please," Bob replied, noting the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. There was something in those eyes, a depth that spoke of stories untold and dreams deferred. "Been working here long?" Maggie poured the coffee with steady hands, the stream dark and steaming. "Oh, about 25 years now. Started when my husband passed. Needed something to keep busy, you know." She paused, studying Bob's face with the curiosity of someone who recognized something familiar but couldn't quite place it. "You're not from around here?" It wasn't a question, and Bob appreciated that she didn't press for details. Small-town wisdom understood the value of privacy, especially for a stranger seeking refuge from whatever storms had driven him to their doorstep. "Just passing through," he said, wrapping his hands around the warm ceramic mug. "Nice place you have here." Maggie's smile brightened genuinely for the first time that evening. "Mr. Murphy opened this place in 1952. His son runs it now, but he keeps everything just like his daddy wanted it. Says there's comfort in things staying the same." Before Bob could respond, a harsh voice cut through their quiet conversation. "Excuse me, waitress." A man in an expensive suit at the corner table snapped his fingers impatiently. "I've been waiting 10 minutes for my check. Some of us have important places to be." The transformation in Maggie's demeanor was subtle but heartbreaking. Her shoulders straightened, her smile became more forced, and she hurried away with a quiet, "Of course, sir, right away." Bob watched as the businessman barely acknowledged her when she brought the check, tossing a few crumpled dollar bills on the table without looking up from his phone. This scene repeated itself several times over the next hour. A young couple laughed loudly at crude jokes while Maggie cleaned their table, making comments about old waitresses who should probably retire. A group of teenagers left a mess of ketchup and napkins, departing without leaving any tip at all. Each time, Maggie absorbed their indifference like a sponge, her dignity intact, but her spirit visibly dimming. Bob found himself growing angry, not just at the customers' behavior, but at the familiar injustice of it all. He had spent his life observing the way society treated its most vulnerable members, writing songs about the forgotten and the dismissed. Yet seeing it play out in real time, watching this gentle woman endure such casual cruelty, stirred something deep in his chest. As the evening wore on and the crowd thinned, Bob noticed Maggie disappearing into a back room during her break. Something, curiosity, instinct, or perhaps the songwriter's compulsion to understand human nature, drew him to investigate. He slipped quietly through the kitchen, past the industrial dishwasher and the walk-in cooler, toward a small employee break room where warm light spilled from beneath a partially open door. What he saw there stopped him in his tracks. Maggie sat at a small table, hunched over a worn notebook, her pen moving across the page with the intensity of someone pouring their soul onto paper. Her lips moved silently as she wrote, and occasionally she would pause, close her eyes, and seem to be listening to something only she could hear. On the table beside her notebook lay an old acoustic guitar, its wood darkened with age and love, the strings gleaming despite their obvious wear. She picked up the guitar with the reverence of someone handling a sacred object, her weathered fingers finding the frets with muscle memory that spoke of countless hours of practice. When she began to play, Bob's breath caught in his throat. The melody that emerged was hauntingly beautiful, a delicate interweaving of folk and country that spoke of heartbreak and hope in equal measure. But it was when Maggie began to sing that Bob felt the world shift beneath his feet. Her voice was pure and achingly honest, carrying the weight of every disappointment she had endured and every kindness she had shown. The lyrics she sang were her own, he realized, words that painted pictures of small-town dreams, of children grown and gone, of love lost and found again in unexpected places. I've been serving coffee and pie for 25 years, watching strangers come and go. Some are kind, and some don't see me here. But every story helps my garden grow. In this little corner of America, where the neon signs flicker and fade, I collect the pieces of broken hearts and turn them into songs that need to be made. Bob stood transfixed, recognizing something extraordinary when he heard it. This wasn't just talent. This was artistry of the highest order, raw and unpolished, but more authentic than anything he had heard in Nashville's finest studios. Maggie Sullivan possessed the rarest gift of all, the ability to transform pain into beauty, to find poetry in the mundane struggles of everyday life. When she finished the song, she sat quietly for a moment, her fingers still resting on the guitar strings. Then she carefully placed the instrument back in its case and returned to her notebook, writing with renewed intensity. Bob retreated to his booth, his mind racing. He ordered another cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie, using the time to process what he had witnessed. When Maggie returned to take his order, he studied her face with new understanding, seeing past the uniform and the tired smile to the artist hidden beneath. "That apple pie's made from my grandmother's recipe," Maggie said, setting the plate before him. "She always said the secret ingredient was a pinch of hope." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Bob replied, taking a bite of the perfectly spiced filling. "Did she teach you other things besides baking?" Something flickered in Maggie's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that someone was asking about her family, her history beyond her role as a waitress. "She taught me that everyone has a story worth telling, said it was important to listen, really listen to people." She was right about that. Bob paused, choosing his words carefully. "I couldn't help but notice you have a guitar back there." The color drained from Maggie's face, and she glanced nervously toward the kitchen. "Oh, I'm sorry if I disturbed anyone. Mr. Murphy lets me play sometimes during my breaks, but I try to keep it quiet." "You didn't disturb anyone," Bob assured her quickly. "In fact, quite the opposite. I've been around music my whole life, And what I heard was, well, it was something special. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her apron. You heard me playing. I heard you creating, Bob corrected gently. Those were your songs, weren't they? For a moment, he thought she might deny it or flee to the safety of another table. Instead, she sank into the booth across from him, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been writing songs since I was 15 years old. Used to dream of, well, dreams don't put food on the table. What happened to those dreams? Maggie's eyes grew distant, and she began to speak in the measured tones of someone who had rehearsed this story in her mind 1,000 times. I was married young, to a good man named David. He encouraged my music, even built me a little studio in our garage. We were going to Nashville together, going to try to make it in the music business. She paused, her fingers absently tracing the rim of Bob's coffee cup. Then David got sick. Cancer, the treatments, the medical bills. I sold my good guitar, pawned my wedding ring, took any job I could find. David died 3 years later, and by then I was 38 years old with no money, no connections, and no reason to believe anyone would want to hear songs written by a middle-aged widow from Cedar Falls. The pain in her voice was so raw that Bob had to look away for a moment. When he met her eyes again, he saw not bitterness, but a profound sadness mixed with acceptance, the look of someone who had made peace with life's cruelties without letting them destroy her capacity for kindness. But you never stopped writing, Bob observed. Music doesn't stop just because life gets hard, Maggie replied with a small smile. If anything, the harder life gets, the more we need songs to help us make sense of it all. I write for myself now, for the joy of it. Nobody else needs to hear them. What if you're wrong about that? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that Maggie was afraid to consider. I'm 62 years old, she said finally. The music business is for young people, beautiful people, people who haven't spent half their lives serving coffee to strangers. Bob leaned forward, his voice intense with conviction. The music business might be for young people, but music itself, real music, that belongs to anyone who has something true to say. And lady, you have more truth in one verse than most Nashville songwriters have in their entire catalogue. Something shifted in Maggie's expression. Hope, perhaps, fighting against years of resignation. You talk like you know something about the music business. Bob smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered features. You could say that. Before he could elaborate, the bell above the diner's entrance chimed again, and a group of college students stumbled in, loud and demanding immediate attention. The spell was broken, and Maggie slipped back into her professional persona, hurrying away to seat the new customers. Bob watched her work for another hour, seeing her now with completely different eyes. Every patient smile, every gracious response to rudeness, every small act of kindness toward difficult customers took on new meaning. This woman was not just surviving, she was practicing a form of artistry, turning each interaction into something beautiful, despite the ugly way she was often treated. As the night grew later and the diner emptied, Bob made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He approached Maggie as she wiped down tables, preparing to close for the evening. I have a proposition for you, he said quietly. She looked up, surprised by his serious tone. A proposition? I want you to play one of your songs for me. Really play it, not just let me overhear it by accident. I want you to perform it like you mean it. Maggie glanced nervously around the empty diner. I couldn't. What if someone comes in? The sign on the door says you're closed. It's just you, me, and the music. Bob's voice carried a gentle authority that was hard to resist. One song. What's the worst that could happen? After a long moment, Maggie nodded and disappeared into the back room, returning with her guitar case. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it and lifted out the worn instrument. The guitar was beautiful despite its age, a Martin that had clearly been well loved and carefully maintained. She settled into the booth across from Bob and spent several minutes tuning the guitar, using the time to gather her courage. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a determination that hadn't been there before. "This song is called The Weight of Dreams," she said softly. "I wrote it about learning to carry the weight of broken dreams without letting them crush your spirit." She began to play, her fingers moving across the frets with increasing confidence. The melody was complex and beautiful, weaving together threads of country, folk and blues in a way that sounded both timeless and completely original. When she began to sing, Bob closed his eyes and let the music wash over him. "I used to dream in colors bright, of stages bathed in golden light, but dreams have weight, and I've learned how to carry mine with grace somehow. The weight of dreams don't disappear, they settle deep and linger near, but if you're strong and if you're true, they'll teach you what you're meant to do. I've served 10,000 cups of coffee, smiled through heartbreak, smiled through pain, but every stranger's story told me my dreams weren't dreamed in vain. The weight of dreams, the weight of dreams. Sometimes they're heavier than they seem, but if you hold them close and tight, they'll guide you through the darkest night." When the last notes faded into silence, Bob sat perfectly still, overwhelmed by what he had witnessed. This wasn't just a good song. It was a masterpiece of songwriting, combining lyrical depth with melodic sophistication in a way that few professional songwriters ever achieved. "Maggie," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "that was extraordinary." She set the guitar aside, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. "It's probably not very good. I don't know much about proper song structure or—" "Stop!" Bob interrupted firmly. "Don't you dare diminish what you just shared with me. That song has more heart, more truth, more genuine artistry than 90% of what's playing on the radio right now." Maggie stared at him, searching his face for signs of pity or condescension. Instead, she found something she hadn't expected: respect. This stranger was looking at her not as a waitress or a dreamer or a woman whose best years were behind her, but as an artist. "Who are you?" she asked suddenly. "You're not just passing through, are you?" Bob was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to reveal. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his harmonica, the same one he had been carrying for decades, its chrome surface worn smooth by countless performances. "My name is Bob," he said simply. "Bob Dylan." The words hung in the air like a song waiting to be sung. Maggie blinked, certain she had misheard, then stared at him with growing recognition. The weathered face, the distinctive voice, the way he had talked about music with such intimate knowledge. How had she not seen it before? "Oh my God," she whispered. You're really just a man who's spent his life trying to capture truth in 3-minute songs," Bob replied with characteristic humility. "Same as you." Maggie's hands flew to her face, overwhelmed by embarrassment and disbelief. "I can't believe I served coffee to Bob Dylan and complained about my life and played my amateur songs." "Your songs aren't amateur," Bob said with quiet intensity. "They're some of the most authentic music I've heard in years. You have a gift, Maggie, a real gift." "But I'm nobody," she protested. "I'm just a waitress from a small town who writes songs in her spare time." So was Woody Guthrie in his way. So was Johnny Cash. So was I, before I was anybody else. Bob leaned forward, his eyes blazing with conviction. "Being somebody in the music business doesn't make your songs more true. Being true makes your songs worth singing." The silence that followed was profound, filled with the weight of recognition and possibility. Maggie stared at her hands, trying to process the surreal turn her ordinary evening had taken. Finally, she looked up at Bob with tears in her eyes. "What am I supposed to do with this?" she asked. "I can't just walk into Nashville and tell them Bob Dylan thinks I'm good." "You don't need Nashville," Bob replied. "Nashville needs you, but more than that, the world needs your voice. Music isn't about industry connections or marketing campaigns. It's about one human being sharing their truth with another human being. You've been doing that your whole life, in this diner, with your customers, through your kindness. Your songs are just another way of doing the same thing." He paused, making a decision that felt as natural as breathing. "I want to record one of your songs." Maggie's mouth fell open. "What?" "I want to record The Weight of Dreams. With your permission, of course. I think people need to hear it. But that's your song now. If you record it, it becomes your song." Bob shook his head firmly. "It will always be your song. I might interpret it, but you created it. And more importantly, I want people to know that. I want them to know about Maggie Sullivan from Cedar Falls, who writes songs that matter." The conversation that followed lasted until dawn. They talked about music, about dreams deferred and dreams reborn, about the strange paths that lead us to the moments that change everything. Bob shared stories of his own struggles, his own doubts, his own moments of wondering whether his voice mattered in a world full of noise. As the sun began to rise over the small town of Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Bob made another decision that surprised even him. "I want you to come with me," he said. "Come with you where?" "Everywhere. I want you to be part of my next tour, not as an opening act or a backup singer, but as a collaborator, a partner. We'll perform your songs together, and you'll perform them alone. I want the world to hear what I heard tonight." Maggie stared at him, overwhelmed. "I can't. I have responsibilities. This job, my life here. Your life here will be waiting for you if you decide to come back," Bob said gently. "But this opportunity might not be. I'm not getting any younger, and neither are you. Sometimes we get one chance to step into the life we were meant to live. This might be yours." The internal battle playing out on Maggie's face was heartbreaking to watch. Hope and fear waged war in her expression, decades of conditioning telling her to play it safe, while her artist's soul screamed at her to take the leap. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," Bob replied. "Fear means it matters." 3 months later, in a recording studio in Nashville, Bob Dylan and Maggie Sullivan sat side by side, guitars in hand, preparing to record The Weight of Dreams. The song had evolved during their time together, enriched by Bob's harmonica and transformed by their combined voices into something even more powerful than its original form. The recording session was unlike anything either of them had experienced. Maggie's nervousness gradually gave way to confidence as she realized that her voice belonged in this room, that her songs deserved to be preserved and shared. Bob watched with quiet satisfaction as she blossomed before his eyes, the uncertain waitress replaced by an artist claiming her rightful place in the world. The Weight of Dreams was released as a single 6 weeks later, credited to Bob Dylan featuring Maggie Sullivan. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Critics praised the song's honesty and emotional depth, but more importantly, it resonated with listeners in a way that few songs do. Radio stations across the country began receiving calls from people asking about the woman with the beautiful voice and who is Maggie Sullivan. The answer came in interviews that revealed Maggie's story, the small-town waitress who had never stopped writing songs, who had served coffee and kindness for 25 years while nurturing her artistic soul in private. Her story became a symbol of hope for dreamers everywhere, proof that it's never too late to claim the life you were meant to live. The tour that followed was a revelation. Night after night, audiences were moved to tears by Maggie's performances, by the raw honesty of her lyrics and the gentle power of her voice. She performed alone and with Bob, sometimes stepping nervously to the microphone, sometimes commanding the stage with surprising confidence. But it was the smaller moments that meant the most to both of them. After concerts, people would approach Maggie to share their own stories of deferred dreams and second chances. A nurse from Detroit who had started painting again at age 50, a mechanic from Phoenix who had returned to writing poetry, a retired teacher from Maine who had formed a band with her neighbor. Maggie's story, had given them permission to reclaim their own artistic souls, to believe that creativity and authenticity matter more than age or conventional measures of success. She had become not just a performer, but a symbol of the artistic spirit that exists in every human being, waiting for the courage to emerge. One evening, 6 months into the tour, Bob and Maggie sat on the steps of their tour bus outside a venue in Colorado. The Rocky Mountains stretched endlessly before them, painted purple and gold by the setting sun. They had just finished a concert that had left the audience on their feet, cheering for an encore that lasted 20 minutes. "Do you ever miss it?" Bob asked. "The diner, the routine, the simplicity of that life." Maggie considered the question carefully. "I miss some of it," she said honestly. "I miss the regular customers who became friends, the comfort of knowing exactly what each day would bring. But I don't miss feeling invisible. I don't miss keeping my songs locked away like secrets I was ashamed of." She paused, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "You know what's strange? I thought this life would change me completely, make me into someone different. But really, I'm still the same person I was in the diner. I'm still writing songs about ordinary people and their struggles and their hopes. The only difference is that now people are listening." "Maybe that was always the only difference that mattered," Bob replied. The tour concluded with a concert at the Grand Ole Opry, a dream Maggie had harbored since she was a teenager, listening to country music on her grandmother's radio. Standing on that legendary stage, looking out at an audience that had come specifically to hear her sing her songs, she felt the completion of a circle that had begun decades earlier. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, in the quiet of her dressing room, when she called Murphy's Diner back in Cedar Falls. The current staff put the phone on speaker so all the employees could hear, and they listened with pride and joy as Maggie described her journey from their workplace to the most famous stage in country music. "You're still one of us, Maggie," said the young waitress who had taken over her shifts. "You're still the same person who taught me to be patient with difficult customers and to remember that everyone has a story worth hearing." That connection to her roots, to the values and experiences that had shaped her songwriting, remained the foundation of everything Maggie built in her new life. She never forgot the lessons learned in 25 years of service, the importance of treating every person with dignity and kindness, the beauty that could be found in the most ordinary moments. A year after that first meeting in the diner, Bob and Maggie returned to Cedar Falls for a special homecoming concert. The entire town turned out, from the teenagers who had once ignored her to the businessman who had snapped his fingers for service. They saw her now not as a waitress, but as an artist who had emerged from their community to touch the world with her music. But perhaps the most touching moment came when the current owner of Murphy's Diner announced that he was renaming it Maggie's Place, in honor of the woman who had served there with such grace for so many years. A plaque by the door would tell her story, not just the fairy tale of discovery and success, but the fuller truth of a woman who had lived with dignity and kindness, even when the world seemed to take her for granted. The concert itself was magical, performed on a temporary stage set up in the town square. Maggie sang all her new songs, the ones that had made her famous, but she also performed some of her older compositions, the ones she had written during her years at the diner, the songs that had sustained her through the long nights and difficult customers and moments of doubt. "This next song," she said to the crowd, "I wrote on a particularly hard day about 10 years ago. A customer had been especially cruel, and I went home feeling invisible and worthless. But then I remembered something my grandmother told me, that every person has value, every story matters, and every act of kindness ripples out into the world in ways we can't imagine." She began to play a gentle melody, her voice carrying clearly across the square. "In the corner booth of a small-town diner, dreams are served with apple pie. Every stranger has a story. Every goodbye hides a why. Some folks see a uniform. Some folks see a tired face. But God sees a heart that's golden and love that time cannot erase. We're all just walking each other home. Through the darkness and the light, every kindness is a candle, guiding someone through the night. When she finished, the silence was profound. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not the wild cheering of a concert audience, but the gentle, sustained appreciation of a community honoring one of their own. In that moment, Maggie understood that her true success wasn't measured in album sales or concert attendance, but in the connections she had forged and the hope she had inspired. After the concert, she stood in the empty square with Bob, both of them reluctant to leave this place where their unlikely partnership had begun. The diner was dark now, its neon sign flickering in the familiar pattern that had welcomed travelers for decades. "Do you think we would have met if I hadn't been running away that night?" Bob asked. Maggie smiled, an expression that had grown more confident over the months, but retained all its original warmth. "I think we would have met somehow. Some connections are meant to happen, whether we're ready for them or not. And are you ready now for whatever comes next?" She considered the question, thinking of the recording contracts and touring opportunities that awaited her, the interviews and photo shoots, and all the machinery of the music industry that was now part of her world. But she also thought of the songs still unwritten, the stories still untold, the people she hadn't yet met who might need to hear that their dreams still mattered. "I'm ready," she said with conviction. "Not because I'm not scared anymore, but because I've learned that being scared just means you're about to do something important." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two artists who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and created something beautiful together. The partnership that had begun with an overheard song and a cup of coffee had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. Not just a professional collaboration, but a friendship that had enriched both their lives immeasurably. As they prepared to leave Cedar Falls and continue their journey together, Maggie looked back one last time at Murphy's Diner, soon to be Maggie's place. Tomorrow, new waitresses would serve coffee to strangers, would listen to their stories, and offer small kindnesses that might seem insignificant, but could ripple out in ways no one could predict. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. But now there was proof, visible to anyone who cared to look, that extraordinary things could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances, that dreams deferred were not necessarily dreams denied, and that sometimes the person pouring your coffee might be an artist whose time has finally come. Bob Dylan had walked into that diner, seeking refuge from the demands of fame and success. Instead, he had found something far more valuable, a reminder of why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. In Maggie's songs, he heard the authentic voice of America that he had spent his career trying to capture and celebrate. The voice of ordinary people living extraordinary lives of quiet dignity and hidden creativity. For Maggie, the journey had been even more transformative. She had learned that it's never too late to claim your place in the world, never too late to step out of the shadows and share your gifts with others. The waitress uniform had been replaced by stage clothes, the coffee pot by a guitar, but the essence of who she was remained unchanged, a woman committed to treating others with kindness and finding beauty in the most unexpected places. Their story became more than just a tale of musical collaboration. It became a testament to the power of human connection, the importance of really seeing and hearing the people around us, and the magic that can happen when we recognize and nurture the artistic spirit that exists in every human being. The world had gained not just a new singer-songwriter, but a new understanding of what it means to live an authentic life, to remain true to your values even as your circumstances change dramatically, and to never underestimate the person serving your coffee, because they might just change your life forever. In the end, perhaps that was the most beautiful song of all, the melody of two souls recognizing each other across the divide of circumstance and status, the harmony of mutual respect and shared creativity, and the lasting refrain of a friendship that had enriched both their lives beyond measure. Years would pass, and both Bob and Maggie would continue to create music that mattered, songs that spoke to the human condition with honesty and grace. But they would always remember that autumn evening in a small-town diner when a chance encounter became the beginning of something extraordinary, when the simple act of really listening to another person opened doors that neither of them had imagined possible. The lesson was simple but profound. Never underestimate the power of a kind heart, a listening ear, and the willingness to see the artist hidden within every human being. Sometimes the person you least expect can teach you the most about what it means to live an authentic life. Sometimes a stranger can indeed be your salvation, not from external circumstances, but from the prison of your own limited expectations about what's possible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a cup of coffee shared with an open heart can lead to discoveries that change not just your own life, but the lives of everyone who hears the songs that emerge from that moment of connection. The story of Bob Dylan and Maggie Sullivan reminds us all that we're surrounded by untold stories, unsung songs, and unrecognized artists. It challenges us to look beyond surfaces, to listen more deeply, and to never assume that someone's current circumstances define the full scope of their potential or their worth. Most importantly, it reminds us that the most meaningful successes in life aren't measured by fame or fortune, but by the connections we make, the kindness we show, and the courage we find to share our authentic selves with the world. No matter how old we are, when we finally find that courage, never underestimate a kind heart, for it just might be the key that unlocks dreams you didn't even know you were carrying. The person you help today might indeed change your life tomorrow, but more importantly, the simple act of seeing and honoring the humanity in others transforms us all, creating ripples of hope and possibility that extend far beyond what we can imagine. In a world that often seems to value youth over wisdom, flash over substance, and novelty over authenticity, the story of Maggie Sullivan stands as a beacon of hope for dreamers everywhere. It reminds us that it's never too late to step into the spotlight, never too late to share your gifts with the world, and never too late to discover that the life you thought was ordinary was actually preparing you for something extraordinary all along. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of human connection and unexpected possibilities, and share in the comments below your own stories of dreams deferred but not forgotten. Remember, we're all just walking each other home through this beautiful, complicated journey of life, and you never know when your next cup of coffee might change everything. 5 years later, Maggie Sullivan stood in her own recording studio, a converted barn on a small property outside Nashville that she had purchased with the royalties from her first 3 albums. The space was warm and inviting, with exposed wooden beams, vintage recording equipment, and walls lined with guitars from different eras of her life, including the old Martin she had played that first night in Murphy's Diner, now carefully preserved in a climate-controlled case. But this morning, the studio held a different kind of energy. Seated in a circle on comfortable chairs were 12 individuals who had responded to an unusual invitation Maggie had sent out 6 months earlier. She had called it the Hidden Voices Project, a search for people over 50 who had stories to tell through music, but had never had the platform to share them. There was Eleanor, a 70-year-old former librarian from Oregon who had been writing protest songs in her basement for 40 years. Marcus, a retired auto worker from Detroit whose blues compositions captured the soul of industrial America. Sarah, a widow from Vermont who had turned her grief into haunting folk ballads. Each person in the circle carried a lifetime of experiences, and each had answered Maggie's call to step out of the shadows and into the light of artistic expression. "When I was serving coffee in Cedar Falls," Maggie began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to command a room, "I thought I was alone in my dreams. I thought being over 50 meant it was too late to start over, too late to be heard. But I've learned something important these past 5 years. We're not alone, and it's never too late. She picked up her current guitar, a beautiful Taylor that Bob had given her for her 65th birthday, and began to play a gentle melody. This is a new song I've been working on. It's called The Late Bloomers, and it's for everyone who thought their spring had passed them by. Grey hair and laugh lines tell stories of their own, hands that have worked hard, hearts that have grown. The world keeps saying youth is where the magic lives, but wisdom has a different kind of gift to give. We are the late bloomers, flowering in fall. Our colours are deeper, we've weathered it all. The songs that we're singing come from places deep, where young hearts can't go, where the old souls keep their secrets and sorrows, their joy and their pain. We are the late bloomers, blooming again. The response was immediate and emotional. Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes, recognizing herself in every word. Marcus nodded with understanding, his weathered hands instinctively reaching for the guitar he had brought. This was more than a workshop. It was a gathering of kindred spirits who had finally found their tribe. Over the following weeks, the barn studio became a sanctuary for these late-blooming artists. Maggie worked with each of them individually, helping them polish their songs while preserving the authentic voice that made each composition unique. She had learned from Bob the delicate art of mentorship, offering guidance without imposing her own style, encouraging growth while respecting the artist's original vision. The breakthrough moment came when Eleanor, the retired librarian, performed her song Books and Barriers, a powerful composition about the ways libraries had served as safe havens for civil rights activists in the 1960s. Her voice, thin at first, grew stronger with each verse, until she was commanding the room with the quiet power of someone who had witnessed history and transformed it into art. I checked out more than books in those days, Eleanor sang, her voice carrying the weight of memory. I checked out hope for those who couldn't read. I checked out courage for those who dared to lead. Between the shelves of wisdom, revolution grew, in whispered conversations about what we could do. The books held all the answers that the world wouldn't say, about dignity and justice and a better way, and I was just the keeper of the written word. But sometimes keeping stories is the bravest thing you've heard. When she finished, the silence in the room was profound. Then Maggie began to clap, slowly and deliberately, and others joined in until the barn filled with the sound of recognition and respect. Eleanor had not just performed a song. She had shared a piece of living history, transformed personal experience into universal truth. This moment crystallized Maggie's vision for what the Hidden Voices project could become. It wasn't enough to simply help these artists develop their songs. She wanted to create a platform for their voices to reach the world. She began making phone calls, reaching out to the network of contacts she had built during her own rise in the music industry. The response was mixed. Some record executives were intrigued by the novelty of senior citizen singers, but their interest felt exploitative rather than respectful. Others dismissed the idea entirely, insisting that the market for music by older artists was too limited to be commercially viable. It was Bob who provided the solution during one of their regular phone conversations. "You don't need their permission," he told her with characteristic directness. "You don't need their approval or their platforms. You have your own voice now, your own following. Use it." The idea that emerged from that conversation was revolutionary in its simplicity. Maggie would produce and release an album featuring all 12 artists from the Hidden Voices project, with proceeds split equally among the participants. She would use her own resources and reputation to ensure the album received proper distribution and promotion, treating each artist as a full collaborator rather than a novelty act. The recording process took 6 months and became one of the most fulfilling experiences of Maggie's life. Each day brought new revelations as these hidden artists shared their stories through song. Marcus's blues composition, Factory Floor Blues, painted a vivid picture of industrial decline and the dignity of manual labor, Sarah's Empty House Lullaby transformed the experience of widowhood into something beautiful and universal. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when a 78-year-old former seamstress named Rosa performed her song Invisible Hands. Rosa had immigrated from Guatemala 50 years earlier and had spent decades working in garment factories, sending money home to her family while raising 5 children as a single mother. Her song was performed in a mixture of English and Spanish, her voice weathered but strong. Manos, invisible hands, sewing the dreams of this promised land, stitch by stitch, dollar by dollar earned, building the future while bridges were burned. They never saw us, we worked in the back, brown faces hidden, staying on track. But every seam that we sewed with care held someone's hope, held someone's prayer. Invisible hands, invisible hearts, playing our role, playing our parts, now in the sunset of all that we've done, finally singing, our song has begun. The album, titled Hidden Voices, Songs from the Heart, was released quietly on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 6 years after Bob Dylan had first walked into Murphy's Diner. Maggie had kept her expectations modest, hoping perhaps to sell a few thousand copies and give her collaborators the satisfaction of having their voices preserved and shared. What happened next surprised everyone. The first review appeared in Rolling Stone 3 days after the album's release. The critic, initially skeptical about what he expected to be a novelty project, was stunned by the quality and authenticity of the music. "These are not amateur hour recordings," he wrote. "These are fully realized artistic statements by people who have lived long enough to have something meaningful to say and skilled enough to say it powerfully." Social media picked up the story, with younger musicians sharing tracks from the album and marveling at the depth of experience reflected in the lyrics. A video of Eleanor performing Books and Barriers went viral, racking up over 2 million views in a week. Comments poured in from listeners around the world, many sharing their own stories of deferred dreams and artistic aspirations. But the most meaningful response came from people in the same demographic as the album's performers. 60 and 70-year-olds who had thought their creative years were behind them began picking up guitars again, returning to poetry, rediscovering their artistic voices. Maggie's management office was flooded with letters from people sharing their own songs and asking how they could join the next Hidden Voices project. The success of the album led to an unexpected opportunity, a television special featuring all 13 artists, including Maggie herself. The show, titled It's Never Too Late, An Evening of Hidden Voices, was filmed in Maggie's barn studio and captured the intimate, supportive atmosphere that had made the project so special. During the filming, something magical happened. As Rosa finished performing Invisible Hands, she began to speak directly to the camera, her English heavily accented, but her message crystal clear. "For 50 years I work, and I never complain. I send money to my children in Guatemala. I raise my 5 babies here alone. I sew clothes for rich people who never see my face. But I always sing while I work. Little songs I make up, songs about my children, songs about my country, songs about being far from home, but still having hope. I think maybe these songs are just for me, just to help me get through the day. But now, here I am, 78 years old, and people are listening to my songs all over the world. My granddaughter calls me from college, and she says, 'Abuela, they played your song on the radio here. My heart, it feels like flying.'" The television special aired on a Sunday night and drew over 12 million viewers, making it one of the most watched music programs of the year. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about ageism in the arts, about the value of lived experience in creative expression, and about the hidden talents that exist in every community. Maggie found herself becoming not just a performer, but an advocate for older artists and a symbol of the possibility of reinvention at any age. Speaking engagements poured in from universities, senior centers, and arts organizations. She spoke about the importance of mentorship, about the value of life experience in artistic expression, and about the danger of assuming that creativity has an expiration date. One of her most powerful speeches was delivered at the AARP National Convention in front of an audience of 5,000 people over 50. Standing on the massive stage, looking out at faces that reflected her own journey of discovery and reinvention, she spoke from the heart. They tell us that our best years are behind us, that we should be content to fade quietly into retirement and resignation. But I'm here to tell you that's a lie. Our best years aren't behind us. They're right now, in this moment, when we have the freedom to finally pursue the dreams we deferred, when we have the wisdom to know what really matters, when we have the courage to share our authentic selves with the world. I spent 25 years serving coffee and thinking that was all I was good for. But those weren't wasted years, they were preparation years. Every customer I served taught me something about human nature. Every song I wrote in secret strengthened my voice. Every act of kindness I performed, every moment of patience I practiced, was building the person I needed to become to handle this moment, this opportunity, this responsibility. Don't you dare think it's too late for you. Don't you dare believe that your dreams have an expiration date. The world needs your voice, your unique perspective, your hard-won wisdom, your authentic truth. And if the world isn't ready to hear it, then it's our job to make them ready. The response was thunderous, but what moved Maggie most was what happened afterward. Hundreds of people approached her with their own stories, their own dreams, their own fears about being too old to start over. A retired teacher showed her lyrics she had written about her 40 years in the classroom. A former construction worker hummed a melody he had been working on since his injury forced him into retirement. A grandmother shared poems she had been writing about raising her grandchildren while their parents struggled with addiction. Each conversation reinforced Maggie's belief that talent and creativity don't diminish with age. They deepen, becoming richer and more meaningful as they're informed by a lifetime of experiences. The challenge wasn't a lack of artistic ability among older adults. It was a lack of platforms, encouragement, and belief that their voices mattered. This realization led to the expansion of the Hidden Voices Project into a nationwide initiative. Maggie partnered with senior centers, community colleges, and arts organizations to create workshops and performance opportunities for older, aspiring artists. She established a scholarship fund to help cover recording costs for artists who couldn't afford professional production. But perhaps most importantly, she never lost sight of the personal connections that had started it all. She maintained relationships with every artist from the original Hidden Voices album, serving as a mentor, collaborator, and friend. When Eleanor's health began to fail, Maggie spent weeks helping her record a final album of protest songs, ensuring that the librarian's powerful voice would be preserved for future generations. The ripple effects of Maggie's work extended far beyond the music industry. Medical researchers began studying the psychological and physical benefits of creative expression among older adults, finding significant improvements in mental health, cognitive function, and overall life satisfaction among participants in artistic programs. Sociologists documented the way intergenerational collaborations between older and younger artists were breaking down stereotypes and building understanding across age groups. Meanwhile, Bob Dylan continued to tour and record, but their friendship remained a constant source of inspiration for both of them. They collaborated on several more songs over the years, each bringing their unique perspective to create something neither could have achieved alone. Their partnership had evolved from mentor-student to true artistic equals, each pushing the other to explore new creative territories. On a quiet evening in late spring, 7 years after their first meeting, Bob and Maggie sat on the porch of her Nashville home, guitars in hand, working on a new song. The melody had come to Maggie in a dream, and Bob had suggested lyrics that transformed her personal reflection into a universal statement about friendship and artistic growth. "What do you think the lesson is?" Maggie asked, as they paused between verses. "If someone were to sum up everything that's happened since that night in the diner, what would be the main takeaway?" Bob was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently picking out a melody on his guitar. "I think," he said finally, "the lesson is that we're all more than we appear to be. Every person we meet is carrying songs we'll never hear, stories we'll never know, dreams we'll never see, unless we take the time to really look, really listen." He paused, looking out at the Nashville skyline twinkling in the distance. "But maybe the deeper lesson is that it's never just about the individual dream. Your success wasn't just about you getting to sing your songs. It was about opening a door for all those other voices that followed. Every dream we pursue creates space for someone else's dream to exist." Maggie nodded, understanding the truth of what he was saying. Her journey from waitress to recording artist had been meaningful not just as a personal transformation, but as proof that such transformations were possible. Every person who heard her story and found the courage to pursue their own deferred dreams was extending the impact of that original moment of connection in the diner. As if summoned by their conversation, Maggie's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a 71-year-old man in Oklahoma who had just recorded his first song after seeing the Hidden Voices television special. The message included a video of him performing an original composition about his experiences as a Vietnam veteran, his weathered voice carrying the weight of memories, both painful and proud. "Listen to this," Maggie said, playing the video for Bob. They sat in comfortable silence as the man's song filled the evening air, another voice joining the chorus of late bloomers who had found the courage to share their authentic selves with the world. When the song ended, Bob smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed the continuing unfolding of something beautiful. "See? It never ends. Every person who finds their voice gives permission for 10 more to find theirs." As the sun set over Nashville, casting long shadows across the music city that had become home to so many dreams, Maggie reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the customers she had served in Cedar Falls, wondering how many of them had their own hidden songs, their own deferred dreams. She thought of the young waitresses and servers working tonight in diners and restaurants across America, perhaps writing their own songs in secret, perhaps waiting for their own moment of recognition and encouragement. The phone rang, interrupting her reverie. It was a producer from a major television network, calling to discuss a new project, a documentary series that would follow Maggie as she traveled across the country, discovering and nurturing hidden artistic voices in small towns and big cities alike. "It would be like a musical version of American documentaries," the producer explained excitedly. "Each episode would feature you mentoring a different artist or group of artists, helping them develop and share their work. We're thinking of calling it The Voice Whisperer or Hidden America Sings." Maggie listened politely but found herself hesitating. The offer was generous, the opportunity significant, but something about it felt wrong. Too produced, too focused on her as a personality, rather than on the artists she worked with. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "This kind of work is very personal to me. I need to make sure any project we do honors the artists we're featuring, not just my story." After hanging up, she shared the conversation with Bob, who nodded approvingly at her careful consideration. "Good instincts," he said. "The moment this becomes about celebrity instead of artistry, you've lost what made it special in the first place." They talked late into the night about the delicate balance between platform and exploitation, about how to use fame and success to lift others without turning their struggles into entertainment. It was a conversation that reflected the wisdom both of them had gained through decades in the music business, an understanding that the most meaningful success comes not from what you achieve for yourself, but from what you make possible for others. The documentary project would eventually move forward, but on Maggie's terms. Rather than focusing on her as the central figure, the series would feature the artists themselves as the stars of their own stories, with Maggie serving as a facilitator and mentor rather than the main attraction. Each episode would be a collaborative effort, with the featured artists involved in every aspect of production, from concept to final edit. But that was still months away. On this particular evening, as Bob eventually headed home and Maggie prepared for bed, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction with the path her life had taken, not because of the fame or the success, but because of the connection she had made, the voices she had helped amplify, and the ongoing proof that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Before turning off the lights, she picked up her journal, a habit she had maintained since her waitressing days, and wrote a final entry for the evening. 7 years ago, I thought my life was a series of small disappointments, that my dreams were just distractions from the reality of getting older without having achieved anything meaningful. Tonight, I'm preparing to help a veteran from Oklahoma record his first album, while a retired librarian from Oregon prepares for her debut at Carnegie Hall next month. The most beautiful part isn't what happened to me, it's what's happening through me, around me, because of connections that started with a simple act of kindness and recognition. Every person who finds their voice creates space for 10 more voices to emerge. Every dream pursued gives permission for other dreams to exist. I am not the center of this story. I am just one thread in a tapestry that grows larger and more beautiful every day as more people realize that their voices matter, their stories count, and their dreams have no expiration date. She closed the journal and set it on her nightstand next to a photograph that had become one of her most treasured possessions. It was a picture from the original Hidden Voices recording session, all 13 artists gathered in the barn studio, instruments in hand, faces glowing with the joy of finally being heard. In the corner of the photograph, barely visible but meaningful to those who knew to look for it, sat an empty coffee cup, a small reminder of where it all began, and a symbol of the unexpected ways that ordinary moments can transform into extraordinary possibilities. As Maggie drifted off to sleep, she could hear, faintly in the distance, the sound of someone playing guitar on a neighbor's porch. She smiled, wondering what songs were being written in that moment, what dreams were taking shape in the gentle strumming of strings and the whispered words of a melody being born. The circle continued to expand, voice by voice, song by song, dream by dream. And somewhere in Cedar Falls, in a diner that now bore her name, a new waitress was probably serving coffee to strangers, listening to their stories, and perhaps, in quiet moments between shifts, writing songs of her own, songs that might someday change the world, one authentic voice at a time.